Now that the draft is come and gone, let's talk about position groups because there was definitely a bit of a theme that happened here. They doubled up on wide receiver, they doubled up on the interior of the offensive line, they doubled up at secondary. So when you look at the position groups that they were able to cover in this draft, let's go positive first, since you're a positive kind of guy. We'll go with the positive first. What position group are you most happy that the 49ers were able to cover in this draft? And then we'll come back after we each go and give the position group that we wish they would have went after in this draft.
Yeah, and I mean, I think before we could even answer this question, Jesse, for me, I think there was a definite theme, like you mentioned, to this draft. I think the 49ers had a distinctive plan about what they were trying to solve in this draft. And I think they stuck to it. Now, whether or not, you agree with that plan and you agree with, how they evaluated the season and how they felt like they needed to get better, we can talk about it at a later time. But for me, they had a distinctive plan. They stuck to that plan. Now, to answer this question directly, the position groups, I love what they did with the wide receivers, picking the wide receivers. But to me, I'm going to start with the secondary just because, and it's kind of much along the lines of what's going on with the wide receiver group. But you mentioned that there's no starting secondary that's under contract in 2025, right? And even the guys that are under contract, they're unproven at best. Maybe they could turn into something, but the guys that we depend on, none of those guys are on contract, maybe with the exception of Jair Brown, who's kind of proven himself at the end of last year. But other than that, we didn't have another outside. We didn't have a bona fide outside corner that we could trust. We didn't have another safety that we could trust. And it seems like the two guys that they brought in Renato and Mustafa, those guys seem like 49ers, Jesse. They seem like the type of players that they remind me of Demo, the swagger, the attitude, the aggressiveness, the physical type of play. And both of us are huge fans of Demo. And so to have guys like that be drafted, to me, I think is I really was excited about those guys. And that was great. And I don't know if you got this sense as well, Jesse, because we talked about it on last week's show. I don't get too deep in the weeds, just analyzing all of these guys. But once they get drafted and they're 49ers, then I'm doing a lot of research. The way that pretty much all of the draft picks, but we'll focus on, the two that we're just talking about. They seem like draft picks where a lot of the football guys are like, yo, these guys are ballers. The guys that I respect, like they love these type of guys. So for me, I'm going to go with the secondary moves that they made just because it goes along lines. We got a secondary coach as our new DC. It seems like we're going to start playing more man. We already been hybriding closer to playing more man. Having another guy there that can match up with Demo and Mooney Ward for this season, I think is phenomenal. And then, next season could eventually be the guy and give some flexibility if we can't sign, both Demo and Mooney Ward next season.
Yeah, absolutely. What's crazy is as the draft was going, I remember our bold predictions from last week. And you remember one of the bold predictions I had was don't be surprised if they go receiver round 1 or round 2. And they went receiver round 1. So I wasn't shocked that they went receiver, but it was like I was kind of shocked, but like, my gosh, man, why? Why did you have to do it? No. But overall, I was going to say secondary, but I'll take another position group because I think there was multiple that we can go with here. Interior offensive line. I mean, I know that everybody wants a tackle, and I did too. I get all of that. But you need to address the offensive line as a whole. And when you go and get Dominic Pooney, who can play all 5 positions, who didn't give up a sack at Kansas, like that's absolutely incredible. He is... Just watching him, he's so nimble and so quick. And so, I mean, he's just so polished and what he brings to the table. I am so excited to have him on this team. I don't know what he contributes this year outside of just filling in for everybody once they get injured. So I'm sure he's going to figure out a way to play a little bit of tackle, a little bit of guard, what have you. But the future for him on this team, I think, is bright, especially because the offensive line is really in flux as well. Maybe not quite as much as the secondary, but if Trent Williams retires, I mean, you're looking at a situation where it's like 3 out of the 5, maybe 4 out of the 5 starting offensive linemen might be different next year. And that's a little bit crazy to think about. But Pooney can fill in at any one of those roles. And having a guy like that is very comforting. Now, they double back in round 6 and they take Jarrett Kingston. Not my guy of choice. I wanted Bo Limmer, who ironically went to the Rams just a pick or two later. But it doesn't really matter because the 49ers and I were on the same page in the fact that we wanted an interior offensive lineman there. They chose somebody different than what I chose. I've just got to trust the fact that they really, really like the player in Kingston and see a role for him going forward. So I'm going to hope that that's the case. But ultimately, again, I know they didn't get a tackle, but they did get 2 offensive linemen on the interior. And maybe both of these guys are starting by next year. So for me, yes, we would have loved many more offensive linemen or maybe different offensive linemen, and that's okay. But ultimately, they did get the interior offensive lineman, and you have to be happy about that. So I'm very happy they addressed the interior side of that offensive line.
And then you mix in, you know, the undrafted free agent, the center
For
from
sure.
he, you know, I was surprised that he wasn't drafted. You know, that offensive line was really good for Michigan. He was the starting center for a championship team. I'm sure Harbaugh would have drafted him if he didn't have, you know, a center, all-pro center already there. But, yeah, I mean, for the 49ers to get him, even though I'm sure Harbaugh would have loved to bring him in as an undrafted, that I think that bodes well, too, because that could be your starting center, you know, in a few years as well.
I mocked him to the 49ers in round 6 or 7 a lot. So I'm actually very happy that he was brought in as well. And shoot, he might make more of an impact than Jarrett Kingston. We'll see. But yeah, ultimately, I think they did do a good job of trying to address the interior of the offensive line. It's just the outside, the tackles, and especially with some of the fan favorites being there in round 2. That was a little bit hard to watch, I understand, but ultimately they did what they did. I think the draft was fine overall, and addressing that was extremely important. So that secondary, I agree with. Now, let's go flip side of that. Let's go a position group you wish they did address a little bit more or just at all in this draft. What do you think?
You know, I guess, you know, I'm really reaching because, to be honest, I'm not, there wasn't any glaring that I was like, dang, I wish they would have picked that. If I were to feel that way, it would probably be a tight end. Because, you know, I think that, you know, we definitely need some kind of backup behind Kittle, even though I think the 49ers are doing what I've been saying the whole time. I think Kittle gets an extension because even 80% of where Kittle is right now is still better than 90% of the tight ends out there. And I know there's this thought process of this inevitable drop in Kittle's production, but you just saw Kansas City give, you know, Kelsey another 2-year extension. So to me, I think that these guys have kind of figured out how to stay elite maybe longer than what it has been in the past. So and I do think there's free agents that could come in and be that backup tight end, but I guess I would say tight end. I know the defensive line might be yours, but for me, I'll just say tight end so that you could go off on, you know, where you wish they would.
No, you know, it's interesting. I actually tight end was where I was going to go as well, because Kittle is getting a little long in the tooth. And it's like, man, they haven't even figured out the second tight end, let alone a replacement for Kittle. Like, heaven forbid Kittle's not on this team in 2 years. What the hell are you going to do? You can't even find a second guy. Now you're supposed to find a first and a second guy. So I'm actually with you on tight end. That was one of those like sneaky positions that, man, if they can pick it up in round 4, you know, I was a big Theo Johnson guy. I was hoping that they'd be able to get him. He went up maybe a little bit earlier than I had hoped. So that one was a hard one. I was actually with you on tight end, but we can go defensive line, certainly. I mean, the 49ers overall, the last couple of years really haven't addressed the defensive line at all outside of one player. And that was a very, very late pick. Now they did go secondary, which I loved on the defensive side, going Malik Mustafa and then Renardo Green. Loved those picks. Even got a linebacker, but man, no defensive line. And I know that, you know, they went and got some guys through free agency and trades and whatnot, but losing guys like Eric Armstead, you know, Chase Young, Kinlaw, who else did they lose? Buddy that used to play for the Raiders. I mean,
Farrell.
Who was Farrell. I mean, it was a complete overhaul, right? A complete overhaul. So it would have been nice to bring in maybe a young player that you can grow and kind of groom into that spot. But ultimately, that's not the route that they took. I mean, you only had so many picks. But I actually agree with you. Tight end was the one that I was looking for, man. It really was. That was the big one for me.